Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. It's going to be fairly changeable, with some slightly milder weather, some colder weather at times, bits and bobs of rain, but equally quite a lot of dry conditions, and hopefully even a bit of sunshine breaking through at times for the first 5 days of February. However, in the next segment of the video we're going to change it up a little bit. We're actually going to have a look at the latest of what is going on in the stratosphere. Now, you may be wondering why we've not really talked about the stratosphere much during this winter period. It's normally quite a staple for our winter videos. We normally have a look at it every week or two in prior years. Now, the reason for that is because since kind of November, we've seen a fairly ordinary stratosphere. Not too much going on. Generally, the temperatures have been around average. The wind speeds high up in the stratosphere have been around average. So we've not really seen much going on to talk about. However, things in the last week or so have changed. There is looking likely now to see some sort of disturbance going on in the stratosphere, a warming perhaps taking place. Now, it's way too early to say if we're going to see a sudden stratospheric warming, which is quite a severe event high up in the atmosphere, but definitely seeing rumblings of the risk of some disturbances, perhaps a big warming taking place, and potentially those winds either weakening or perhaps reversing into mid-February. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because this could be the reason why we're starting to see increased confidence of potentially cold or even very cold conditions as we head into the middle third of February. Perhaps this stratospheric warming could be having knock-on effects and allowing this Scandinavian high that we are seeing in the outputs coming in later next week to gain strength and potentially hold on for a good period of time. And if that does occur, if that Scandinavian high hangs on for a good week or two, which some models are showing, that's when we could see very cold air moving our way. And it all kind of fits together because today the latest ECMWF does exactly that. We do see an exceptionally cold easterly wind as we do head to the end of that ECMWF run. We'll show you that towards the end of the video. It really does pull in some very cold air, -10 isotherm getting in for all. We would be looking at widespread wintry conditions and just exceptionally cold weather. As I said, increased confidence in this Scandinavian high, and we could be setting up quite a cold month. Still not guaranteed, but looking more and more likely. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. And remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now, if you start on the live radar, as I said a few moments ago, we've got very changeable conditions at the moment. Right now, we're in kind of a drier spell. We are going to see rain pushing in from the west, and it is bringing generally thicker cloud for all, as we do see these weather fronts disintegrating away and just pushing loads of cloud eastwards. But generally, at the moment, it is fairly dry. And if we look at the temperatures during the middle of the afternoon, it's chillier further eastwards. We've still got some colder air around, but it's nothing major. It's generally around average, maybe even slightly above average, especially the further westwards you go. We're seeing a bit more in the way of yellows, but still going to see some frosts over the coming evenings, as we are going to see some colder air masses mixing in with the westerly winds that we are seeing that are riding over the high pressure at the moment. This high pressure that's trying to push in at the moment is the higher pressure that is going to eventually push towards Scandinavia, and that is when we could see those winds turn easterly. Now, do look at the latest UKV. Again, we'll run through this quite quickly. Not too many changes since yesterday. You can see, again, lots of cloud around and weather fronts trying to push in through this evening, but really not having too much success, fizzling away into Sunday morning, but still producing quite a bit of rain in the far west. And that's because that weather front is coming up against the high pressure and it's sucking all of the energy out of it as it moves through. Still a bit of drizzle and cloud clearing eastwards, and another weather front tries to push through there on Monday into Tuesday. Has a little bit more success, but once again degrades away significantly there through Tuesday evening. And you can see eventually we're into a colder, fresher air mass, and high pressure has now firmly built in there as we do head into Thursday. Look at that high pressure slap bang over the top of us. It's more to our south, especially earlier on in the week, and that's why we aren't seeing it as dominant in terms of dry conditions and clear skies. By sort of Sunday, you can see the high pressure is there, but it's further southwards. Go to Thursday, though, high pressure slap bang over the top of us. But that is not where it's going to stay. It is going to transition northwards, and that's where we could see in the subsequent days towards next weekend, or in so around 7 days' time, those easterly winds to get unleashed. Do look at the max temperatures. You can see this afternoon, generally average, kind of 5 to 10 degrees. Of course, milder the further eastward you go. overnight this evening, frost in the east, but not expecting anything too major. And into Sunday afternoon, once again, temperatures around average 5 to 9 degrees. Into Monday, again a frost in the far east, furthest away from that milder air and from the cloud that's trying to push in from the west. So frost once again there. And into Monday afternoon, a day where temperatures are slightly milder, more towards the 7 to 11 degree mark. Into Tuesday, similar conditions, maybe just about double digits in a few spots. But into Wednesday, as you can see, high pressure is building in, fresher air mass taking over, potentially a frost into Wednesday morning. And by the afternoon, much cooler, towards the low single digits in the north, only 6-7 degrees further southwards. And you can see a much more widespread frost there into Thursday, as we are all firmly under higher pressure. And you can see if we put on the upper air temperatures, we're in chilly air, nothing amazingly cold yet, but average to slightly below average by a degree or two. And that means cold, frosty conditions look like they could dominate the end of the working week. As I said though, easterly winds are going to be pulling in as we head into next weekend. Now, before we have a look at the main model runs, I do want to have a look at the stratosphere. As I said at the start of the video, this could be what's driving the risk of that Scandinavian high holding on and just generally blocking, dominating more of February. It's slowly increased that blocking over the last week or so, and it all could be to do with the stratosphere. Now, this is one GFS run, so don't take this as gospel. This is not what is definitely going to happen, but it is just an example of what we're seeing from some of the model output at the moment. Now, if you don't know what's going on in the stratosphere, I'll try and do it quite quickly, talking about why this is affecting us, because of course we do touch on this every time we look at the stratosphere, and I know a lot of people are new here sometimes and don't understand exactly what's going on. Essentially, we're looking at 10 HPA temperatures, so this is miles up in the air, up in the stratosphere, above the troposphere where our actual weather takes place, and inevitably above the North Pole we've got very cold air. These areas have not seen any sun all of the past kind of 6 weeks or so. Slowly though, the sun is returning, and so the stratosphere will inevitably slowly turn milder in the next 2 months or so before it kind of degrades away. But what essentially happens is, high up in the stratosphere we get this big cold pool developing during the winter months, and it's much colder than the mid-latitudes, and that temperature division causes the stratospheric polar vortex, essentially a fast-moving band of air high up in the atmosphere, and because of the way the planet spins, it moves west-east. So it is the main driver of atmospheric winds high up in the atmosphere, and inevitably those winds high up in the atmosphere affect the wind slightly lower down, that then affect the wind slightly further down, and we see this sort of cascade effect where the stratospheric polar vortex eventually impacts the tropospheric polar vortex, which is all of that cold air that we see at 850 HPA, which we do look at in our sort of normal sort of videos, and you can see that eventually this polar vortex right high up in the atmosphere has knock-on effects on what we see on our day-to-day weather. Not one-to-one correlation. There can be disturbances in different layers of the atmosphere that can sort of move things around, but generally speaking, when we've got a very strong polar vortex, we're more than likely going to see more westerly winds dominate. But what we've seen recently is, in the last few outputs, is watch what happens to the polar vortex. It gets stretched and strained by a big warming coming out of Siberia. And what this does is it weakens those polar vortex. It starts to split the polar vortex, and as we head towards the end of this run, it gets properly displaced and kind of torn apart. And look at this, a massive warming replaces it high up in the atmosphere, and we see the winds, look at that, they're all over the place. So essentially, major sudden stratospheric warming from this latest GFS run, a split of the polar vortex, and essentially what this means is throughout the atmosphere, those standard westerly winds would get disturbed. And that means that if we've got this Scandinavian high that's trying to build in the troposphere, it has a higher chance now of holding on, because those westerly winds that would normally try and tear it apart and try and move it away don't exist, or at least are much weaker. And this trend has been slowly appearing over the last few days. If we just go back to the start of the run, look at that, very well confined westerly flow high up in the atmosphere. To the end of the run, mid-February, it's all over the place, all scattered in almost a figure of 8. And this means that throughout the atmosphere we're expecting to see more disturbances and essentially more unusual weather patterns, which a big block towards Scandinavia or Svalbard would be. So very interesting signs. It's not guaranteed, but definitely a real high possibility of some sort of disturbance. This is the ECMWF, very similar to what we're looking at here. These are not the absolute temperatures though, these are anomalies. So you can see at the moment, blues over the northern hemisphere. So essentially, stronger than average polar vortex, ever so slightly, it's not particularly strong. Negative there. Red starts to develop, so a positive anomaly, and then right towards the end of the run, quite a strong positive anomaly. Not overwhelming, so not expecting a major sun stratospheric warming, because these are weakly mean anomalies from ensembles, so we're going to see the whole breadth of outcomes here, but most are at least going for a warming. And if we look on the same data on a line chart, you could see, although yes, actually most are not going for a major sun and stratospheric warming, there is a substantial number that go for quite a big warming into mid to late February. And again, it's all about contrast. If we go back to the beginning, a week ago, very few in February. Most are well above average. We progressed over the past week, and you can slowly see more and more are going for that lower than average polar vortex strength, and quite a few even going for a reversal. So by no means are we guaranteed a sudden stratospheric warming through February. I'd still say it's only a 10 or 20% chance looking at these ensembles, but I think there is quite a high chance of some sort of disturbance. And everything's kind of on a scale. Even a disturbance up in the polar vortex, even a slight warming, could have knock-on effects and mean the Scandinavian high we're seeing at the surface could have a higher chance of holding on. So I wouldn't be surprised if ever so slowly over the next few days we saw an escalation from this Scandinavian high. If it holding on longer and longer, perhaps with slightly further northwards, perhaps intensifying the cold pool that we could tap into. So these are things we need to keep a very close eye on, and that's why I think ever so slowly over the past week, this possibility of a colder middle period of February has just ever so slightly increased, and I think it will continue to increase if these signals high up in the stratosphere do continue. Now, of course, I've glossed over the stratospheric warming here and sort of the impacts very quickly. Of course, I don't want this video to drag on too long. But if you are interested more in this, could you have a look on the Met Office website? Of course, I've got videos earlier on in the winter, especially the winter look-aheads. There should be a playlist for that. Do have a look at those, as I do go into a lot more detail on the stratosphere, more looking at the longer-term prospects during the autumn, but again, looking at the potential impacts and knock-on effects. So do check that out, and of course, I think we'll probably touch on this further in the coming days, especially if we do see continued escalation like this. But if we do go back to our daily charts, and you can see at the moment, high pressure is slowly building in, and this is the latest 6 o'clock run. I know it says the 12 o'clock run has just come out, but it hasn't fully run yet, only the first frame. So we'll still have to look at the 6 o'clock run, unfortunately. But you can see it does look like a fairly ordinary westerly flow. Heights trying to rise towards Scandinavia, but struggling initially with this very strong pool of tropospheric polar vortex. So do listen now, tropospheric polar vortex is sat right here towards Greenland, northern Canada. And as I said, if the stratospheric polar vortex gets disturbed, we'd expect knock-on effects, and that could affect the tropospheric polar vortex, which we're seeing here, weaken it and allow higher pressure to dominate further. So all these things kind of interlink together, and that's why I think that, yeah, definitely could be a real possibility of a cold period here into mid-February. And you can see nothing too out of the ordinary, at least for early February, and then slowly, later on next week, that Scandinavian high builds in, and we do see easterly winds getting unleashed. Now, initially, they're cold. Not very cold, just cold. Down to -5 to maybe -8. Chilly, cold enough for snow, but we'd still be looking at above freezing in the day, below freezing at night. You know, nothing too out of the ordinary in terms of cold weather during the winter months. That continues. We'll keep the upper air temperatures on just to show you those air masses. We actually see some slightly milder air pull in for a time. Very cold air stays close by to our east. But of course, this is upper air temperatures. At the surface, it probably would stay cold just because we're under higher pressure. And into the subsequent days, we see continued easterly trends, and then slowly, look at this, a big cold pull is building out to our east. Although we go milder for a time, I wouldn't be surprised if Scandinavian high rebuilt and we saw a very cold easterly. So GFS not on board with anything major, like the ECMWF is, but very much has that very strong block towards Scandinavia, trying to extend northwards towards the end of its runs, and yet would be very interesting to see how this does evolve in the subsequent runs. You can even see a bit of high pressure trying to penetrate the Arctic air from Alaska. Again, could we be seeing a split at the Stratospheric polar vortex? If that did occur, then yes, things could get very interesting indeed. But yeah, latest GFS, cold, but not as cold as some other runs have been over the last few days, but still fairly supportive of that fairly strong, cold easterly wind there into the middle part of February. Now the latest GEM, very, very similar. High pressure building up towards Scandinavia, encouraging an easterly wind, and that easterly wind does move in there towards the end of the run. Again, quite high pressure dominated. The block isn't getting towards Svalbard or Iceland where we kind of need it to be to pull in very cold air, but we're still pulling in chilly air from the east. It still would be cold enough for daytime temperatures to be below freezing. You see this here, and nighttime temperatures below freezing, daytime temperatures 2 or 3 degrees, the risk of snow and for wintry showers coming in from the east. So GM is fairly in the middle, bog standard kind of run we've seen at the moment, with cold easterlies, but nothing too exceptional. However, the ECMWF this morning is one that would produce some significant cold weather, very cold weather in fact. You can see over the next week or so it's fairly the same as the GFS and the GM. Easterly winds pushing in, oscillating between cold easterlies and more average kind of easterly winds. Nothing too exceptional as of yet, but watch what happens. The high pressure loses a bit of intensity towards Scandinavia, but it rebuilds. And look where it rebuilds. Greenland, Svalbard, and Iceland. I can't say it's exactly because of a sun stratospheric warming, or at least a warming taking place up in the northern hemisphere. But you can't say the two couldn't be interlinked. There is the risk of that warming taking place high up in the stratosphere could, on this at least latest ECMWF run, be propagating through the atmosphere quite quickly and encouraging that block to move northwards. And what we see is a very cold easterly wind developing. Look at that trough, exceptionally cold trough, very cold easterly winds, minus 10 isotherm moving in here for the middle portion of February. And my gosh, yes, this would be extreme. We would see some very cold conditions, daytime highs of only if we go back, only 1 or 2 degrees, overnight temperatures well below freezing, and we would be expecting to see snow piling in from the east. Very strong winds coming in off the North Sea, and this would be a classic cold, wintry easterly wind. Not on the levels of the beast in the east, we'll stress that. Beast in the east kite levels, as I continue to say, would be minus 15 to minus 20 degree isotherm. That air is still quite far away, but it's still minus 10 and below, which would be a substantial colder spell and would produce widespread snow. So yeah, would be very interesting seeing this from the latest ECMWF. And the biggest thing is it's not an outlier. It's one of the colder runs, but it's not an outlier by any means. And if we do look at the latest ensembles, if we start on the GFS, you can see about around average, slightly above average over the next few days. Big drop there later on this working week. And then you can see we kind of flatline there around minus 5. So cold, not exceptionally cold, but pretty cold. And then you can start to see more and more go very cold in the days beyond that. But just generally, the GFS is cold. Nothing too exceptional, but notable. And you can see the snow depth, definitely. Quite a few snow depth spikes. And more importantly, temperatures turning very cold. 3-4 degrees. And of course, the ensembles normally overdo the temperatures a little bit. And the dew points as well, freezing to well below freezing. So it shows you a very cold, dry air mass there as we do head towards that middle portion of February. But as I said, it's the ECMWF which has been the standout run today. Similar to yesterday, the ensembles are still a bit of pessimistic. There's still a bit of uncertainty. Still, they are trending colder. They're colder than yesterday's runs, but they're still not as kind of consistent and clustered together like the GFS. But there's lots of cold runs appearing there around that 8th, 9th of February onwards. And then you can see the operational run there really falling off a cliff down to minus 10 to minus 12. Quite a few runs, though, are getting there as well. So that is interesting. Definitely an increasing signal for very cold conditions to come into mid-February. It's still way too early to call it as a definitive event, but it is getting more and more likely. Confidence is increasing, and of course, as we've just touched on at the start of the video with this sudden stratospheric warming possibilities, or let's just say stratospheric warming, because I still think an SSW has got a low chance of occurring, but I think a minor warming, or at least a notable warming, has got a more moderate to higher chance. But if a warming did occur up in the stratosphere, that could allow these more colder runs to develop further. So I think we'll have to wait and see exactly how it does develop, but definitely increasing signs once again today. And yeah, we'll be watching this very, very carefully over the coming days. As I said, we could see some very cold conditions developing here as we do head into February. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.